A 9-year-old girl sits alone on a cot in a freezing laundry room, holding a dead man's radio against her chest. Down the hall, the people who are supposed to protect her are deciding to send her away. No mother, no father, no one. The batteries are almost gone, so she does the only thing left. She presses the button and whispers into the static, "My daddy was Roadrunner. Is anybody out there?" She doesn't know that 40 miles away, a stranger is about to nearly drive off the road. She doesn't know that by sunrise, 200 trucks will fill her front yard. All she knows is she's begging, listening to the static, waiting to see if anyone answers. The wind came off the Texas Panhandle the way it always did in late October, flat and endless, carrying the smell of diesel and dust across the gravel lot behind the Pike house. Maddie Caldwell pressed her thin shoulder against the cold metal of the storm shed and listened to the highway breathe. Interstate 40 ran half a mile north of the property, a river of headlights that never stopped moving. To most kids in Amarillo, that sound was just background noise. To Maddie, it was the sound of her father. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with a tangle of brown hair that nobody bothered to brush anymore. 10 months ago, she'd had a bed with a quilt, a kitchen that smelled like bacon on Sundays, and a man who called her Little Bird and let her ride shotgun in a Peterbilt 379 with a chrome bulldog on the hood. Now she had a cot in a converted laundry room and a list of chores taped to the wall. Ray Caldwell had driven long haul for 22 years. He'd hauled produce out of California, steel out of Pittsburgh, Christmas trees down from Oregon. He'd taught Maddie how to read a map before she could read a chapter book, and he'd taught her the language of the road, the 10 codes, the handles, the unwritten rules of men who lived between exits. "Channel 19, he used to say, tapping the old CB radio bolted under the dash. "That's the family channel, Little Bird. You ever in trouble and I'm not there, you get on 19 and you call for Roadrunner. Somebody's always listening." Roadrunner had been his handle for 2 decades. Every trucker between Albuquerque and Oklahoma City knew it. Then, on a sleet, slick morning last December, a tire blew on a loaded trailer near Tucumcari, and Ray Caldwell's truck left the road. Maddie had been at school. She found out from a principal with a soft voice and wet eyes. There was no mother. She'd left when Maddie was 3. There were no grandparents close enough or well enough to take a child. So the state of Texas placed Madison Caldwell with a licensed foster family on the edge of Amarillo, Dennis and Lorraine Pike. The Pikes took in foster children the way some people took in stray dogs, not out of love, but because there was money in it. $400 a month per child, and they kept 3. Lorraine spent it on lottery tickets and cigarettes. Dennis spent it at the bar off Amarillo Boulevard. The children ate generic cereal and dollar store bread, and they learned not to ask for more. "You eat what's put in front of you," Lorraine would say, "or you don't eat. This ain't a restaurant." Maddie learned fast. She learned to fold laundry without being told, to stay invisible, to never let Dennis catch her in a bad mood. She learned that crying only made things worse. The other 2 kids, a quiet boy named Tyler and a toddler the Pikes called the baby, had learned the same. At school, the teachers thought she was just shy. They didn't know she stayed quiet because she was rationing her energy, the way her father had taught her to ration fuel on a long grade. "You don't burn it all at the bottom of the hill, Little Bird. You save some for the climb." She didn't have a climb in front of her. She had a wall, but she saved her energy anyway, because saving things was the only kind of hope she had left. She saved the last good apple from her lunch tray. She saved the warm spot by the dryer vent, and she saved her father's voice, replaying it in her head at night until she could almost feel the rumble of the engine under her seat and smell the pine air freshener that always hung from his mirror. But Maddie had something the others didn't. She had a secret in the bottom of her school backpack, wrapped in one of her father's old flannel shirts. It was a handheld CB radio, a Cobra, scratched and dented, with a stubby black antenna. Ray had bought it for her 2 Christmases ago so she could talk to Daddy when he was on the road, and she was at the babysitter's. She'd hidden it from the caseworker, from the Pikes, from everyone. It was the last piece of him she had that still made his voice possible. She'd never turned it on in front of anyone. The batteries were almost dead. She was saving them. For what, she didn't know. That night, the Pikes had a fight. Dennis came home smelling of beer and slammed a cabinet so hard the glass cracked. Lorraine screamed about money. Somewhere in it, Maddie heard her own name. That Caldwell girl eats more than the check covers. And then Dennis's voice, lower, uglier. Then we send her back and take a younger one. Easier. Maddie sat on her cot in the laundry room with her knees pulled to her chest. Send her back. To where? There was no back. There was no one. She pulled the flannel-wrapped radio out of her backpack and held it against her chest, the way she used to hold her father's hand. Through the thin wall, she could hear the highway, all those engines rolling east and west through the dark, drivers she would never see. Somebody's always listening. Her hands were shaking when she pressed the power button. A red light blinked weakly to life. She turned the dial to channel 19 and lifted the radio to her mouth. "Hello?" she whispered. Then, remembering, she keyed the mic. Breaker 19. This is Little Bird. I'm looking for Roadrunner. My daddy was Roadrunner. Is anybody out there? Static answered her. Nothing but the hiss of empty air. She tried again, her voice cracking. Please, my name is Maddie. My daddy drove a truck and he died, and they're going to send me away. If anybody knew Roadrunner, please, I'm scared. She let go of the mic and listened to the static, and she felt the last little flame of hope in her chest start to gutter. Then the radio crackled. A man's voice came through, rough, slow, almost disbelieving. Say again, little lady, did you say Roadrunner? 40 miles east of Amarillo, in the cab of a westbound reefer truck, Hank Mercer nearly drove off the road. He was 54 years old, built like a retired linebacker, with a gray beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He'd been driving for 30 years, and he'd heard a lot of strange things come over Channel 19 at night. Drunks, jokers, lonely men singing to nobody. But he had not heard the name Roadrunner spoken aloud in 10 months, and he had never heard it spoken by a child. He grabbed his mic. Little Bird, this is Gear Jammer. You hold on now. You hold on. Ray Caldwell. That was your daddy? The little voice came back, trembling. You knew him? Hank Mercer had to clear his throat twice before he could answer. He knew him. Lord, did he know him? Ray Caldwell had pulled Hank out of a jackknifed cab in an ice storm outside Flagstaff in 2009. Ray had loaned him $3,000 when Hank's wife got sick and never once asked for it back. For 15 years, they'd run the same lanes, eaten at the same truck stops, watched each other's backs across 1,000,000 miles of asphalt. When Ray died, Hank had been a pallbearer. He'd folded the man's CB radio handle into a card and put it in his shirt pocket, and he still carried it there. Yeah, darling, Hank said softly. I knew your daddy. He was the best man I ever met. Now you listen to me real careful. Where are you right now? A house, Maddie whispered. By the highway. There's a sign on the road that says, it says Pike. I'm not supposed to have this radio. If they hear me, I'll get in trouble. You ain't gonna get in trouble. Not anymore. Hank's voice was steady, but his hand was shaking on the wheel. Are you safe right now? This minute? Is anybody hurting you? There was a long pause. Not right now, she said. But they said they're going to send me away, and I don't have anybody. Yes, you do, Hank said. Yes, you do, baby girl. You got more people than you know. Now I need you to do one thing for me. I need you to keep that radio on, and I need you to stay quiet and stay put. Can you do that? Okay. Good girl. Gear Jammer out. And I'm coming your way. Hank Mercer keyed the mic again, but this time he didn't speak to Maddie. He spoke to the entire channel, to every driver within range of his antenna, in the flat, hard tone of a man who had made a decision. "Break 19, break 19. This is Gear Jammer and this is a real call, not a joke. Y'all listen up. Some of you out here ran with a driver named Ray Caldwell, handle Roadrunner, out of Amarillo. We lost him last winter. I just got his little girl on the radio. 9 years old. She's in a foster house off I-40 and she's begging for help. I'm headed there now. If Roadrunner ever bought you a cup of coffee, ever flashed you over in the rain, ever did one decent thing for you on this road, now's the time to pay it back. Caldwell's girl needs us." For a moment there was nothing. Then the radio exploded. "This is Diesel Dan out of Tucumcari. I knew Roadrunner. I'm rolling." "Copy that. This is Sharon Dalton, Lady Holler. I'm at the Flying J on Lakeside and I'm coming." "Big country here. I owe that man 50 favors. Where's the 20? "Roadrunner pulled my rig out of a ditch in 18. I'm there." Voice after voice, handle after handle, the channel filled up until it was a wall of sound. Hank Mercer wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and pushed his old Kenworth up over 80. Sharon Dalton, 50 years old, silver hair, 28 years on the road, was the one who started making it organized. While the men roared, she got practical. She called the truck stops on her cell and told the night clerks to spread the word. She posted in 3 trucking forums and a Facebook group with 40,000 members. Driver's daughter in trouble, Amarillo, who's close. She found the exit number from the partial address Maddie had given Hank and started routing people. Sharon had buried a child of her own years ago, a daughter, a long time gone, and she never talked about it, not on the radio, not at the truck stops. But she thought about that girl now as she typed, and her jaw was set hard. Some things you didn't get a second chance to fix. This, maybe you did. She worked the phone like a dispatcher running a fleet, calm and fast, and every driver she reached said the same thing before they even heard the details. "If it's for Roadrunners, kid, tell me where." By midnight, the convoy was forming. They came off the interstate in 1s and 2s at first, a dozen rigs idling in the lot of a Love's Travel Stop 2 exits from the Pike House, their running lights glowing red and amber in the dark. Then more. Refrigerated trucks, flatbeds, tankers, car haulers. Drivers climbed down from their cabs and shook hands and asked the same question. Is it true? Roadrunner's girl? It was true. Hank Mercer rolled into the lot a little after 1 in the morning, and the men parted to let him through. Because everyone knew he'd been closest to Ray. He climbed down stiff from the long drive and looked at the crowd. 30 rigs already, with headlights coming off the interstate every few minutes. And he felt something swell up in his chest that he didn't have a word for. "All right," he said, his voice carrying across the lot. "Here's how this goes. We don't bust down any doors. We don't scare that little girl worse than she already is. And we don't give anybody an excuse to call us a mob. We do this the right way." He looked at Sharon. "You call the law yet?" "Already did," Sharon said. "Officers meeting us at the house at first light. And I called Child Protective Services. Got a woman named Carol Whitman. She's the on-call. She's not happy about the hour, but she's coming." Hank nodded slowly. "Then we wait for sunup. And when the sun comes up over that house, the first thing that little girl is going to see is every one of us standing in that yard." The drivers settled in to wait. Somebody started a coffee urn going on a tailgate. A flatbed driver from Oklahoma broke out a case of breakfast bars and passed them down the line. They talked in low voices in the dark, swapping the stories that had brought them here. The time Roadrunner gave a rookie his own chains in a snowstorm and drove on bald tires himself. The time he sat with a grieving driver in a Waffle House until 4 in the morning so the man wouldn't be alone. The way he ended every transmission with the same 2 words, "Drive safe," like a blessing he handed out for free. The more they talked, the more certain they became that they were exactly where they belonged. Across the dark lot, more headlights turned in off the highway. 40 trucks now, 50. And somewhere in a cold laundry room half a mile away, A 9-year-old girl held a dying radio against her chest and waited for morning. Dawn came gray and slow over the panhandle. Maddie hadn't slept. She'd kept the radio on under her pillow, the volume turned down to almost nothing, listening to the murmur of voices all night, men and women she'd never met, talking about her father like he was a hero, talking about her like she mattered. Around 4 a.m, the batteries finally died, the red light fading to black, and she'd held the silent radio and cried, quietly, the way she'd taught herself to. She didn't know if any of it had been real. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe nobody was coming. She'd learned not to count on people. She lay there in the dark and did the thing she always did when the fear got too big. She built her father's truck in her mind, piece by piece, the way he'd taught her the day she was bored at a way station, the bunk behind the seats with the blue curtain, the little fridge that hummed, the photo of the two of them taped to the dash, both squinting in the sun outside the Grand Canyon. The CB bolted underneath, its dial worn smooth from his thumb. If she concentrated hard enough, she could almost climb up into that cab and pull the door shut behind her and be safe. But the laundry room was cold, and the morning was coming, and the Pikes' voices last night had been real, and Send Her Back had been real, and a girl couldn't live inside a memory of a truck. At 6:15, she heard the first engine. It wasn't the highway sound. The highway was awash, a blur. This was distinct. A deep, low diesel rumble, close, turning off the road and onto the gravel of the Pike property. Then another. Then another. Maddie sat up on her cot. Down the hall, Dennis Pike's voice barked, thick with sleep. "What in the hell is that?" Maddie went to the small window of the laundry room, stood on a milk crate, and looked out. The gravel lot was filling with trucks. Not 3 or 4. Dozens. They came off the highway in a slow procession, big rigs of every kind, their chrome catching the first light, and they pulled into a wide arc around the front of the house and switched off their engines one by one until the silence was almost as loud as the noise had been. Men and women climbed down and stood in the cold, breath steaming, and they kept coming, more trucks parking out along the road shoulder now, a line of them stretching back toward the interstate as far as Maddie could see. She would learn later that there were more than 200. Dennis Pike threw open the front door in a stained undershirt, his face red. "This is private property," he shouted at the crowd. "Y'all get these trucks off my land before I call the cops." A tall man with a gray beard stepped forward from the front of the crowd. He moved without hurry. He had a card in his shirt pocket and a look on his face that made Dennis Pike take half a step back. "Cops are already on their way, friend," Hank Mercer said. "We called them ourselves. So's Child Protective Services. We're all just going to wait right here, real peaceful, till they show up." He looked past Dennis, into the house. "We're here for Maddie Caldwell." Lorraine appeared behind her husband, cigarette already lit, eyes darting over the impossible scene in her yard. "That girl's a ward of the state," she snapped. "You got no right." "No, ma'am," Hank said. "You're right about that. We got no legal right to a thing. That's why we called the people who do." He raised his voice, not in anger, but so it would carry, so the girl somewhere inside that house could hear it. "Maddie? Little bird? My name's Hank. I was your daddy's best friend. I'm the one you talked to on the radio. You don't have to be scared anymore, sweetheart. We're all out here. We're not leaving." Inside the laundry room, Maddie's breath caught. She climbed off the milk crate. She walked down the hall on bare feet, past a stunned Tyler peeking from his door, past Lorraine, past Dennis, who, in front of 200 witnesses, did not dare grab her, and she stepped out onto the front porch in her 2 small pajamas, into the freezing morning air. And she saw them. 200 drivers, filling the yard and the road and the gray dawn, every face turned toward her. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Hank Mercer took off his cap and held it over his heart, and behind him, an old driver named Big Country did the same, and then Sharon Dalton, and then it moved through the whole crowd like a wave. 200 people baring their heads to Ray Caldwell's daughter. "There she is," Hank said softly. "There's Roadrunner's girl." Maddie's legs carried her down the porch steps before she decided to move. She ran across the cold gravel, and Hank Mercer dropped to one knee, and she crashed into him and held on like he was the last solid thing in a flooding world. He smelled like diesel and coffee and old upholstery. He smelled like her father's truck. For 10 months she had been holding everything in. The grief, the fear, the loneliness. All of it packed down tight so the Pikes couldn't use it against her. Now, with her face buried in the shoulder of a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all, the whole weight of it came loose at once. She sobbed in a way she hadn't let herself since the morning the principal told her. Big shaking sobs that emptied her out, and Hank Mercer just held on and let her, one huge hand cradling the back of her head, murmuring the same thing over and over. "I got you. I got you. You're all right now." The 200 drivers stood and bore witness, and more than a few of them, hard men who'd seen everything the road could show, wiped their eyes with the heels of their hands and looked away to give the moment its privacy. "I got you," Hank whispered into her hair, his own voice breaking. "I got you, little bird. Your daddy sent us. You hear me? He's been looking out for you this whole time. We just didn't know where to find you." Behind them, a county sheriff's cruiser turned off the highway, its lights flashing, slowing as the deputy took in the unbelievable sight of 200 trucks and 200 drivers gathered in a foster family's front yard at sunrise. Officer Bradley Knox got out slowly, hand resting on his belt, and surveyed the crowd. "Somebody," he said, "want to tell me what in the world is going on here?" Sharon Dalton stepped forward with a folder in her hand. Printouts, dates, a copy of Ray Caldwell's obituary, and the questions she'd already started gathering about the Pike house. "Officer," she said, "we've got a child here who reached out for help, and we've got some real serious concerns about how she's been cared for. We'd like you to take a look. That's all. We just want somebody official to take a look." Officer Knox glanced at the little girl clinging to the big trucker. He glanced at Dennis Pike, sweating in his undershirt despite the cold, and at Lorraine, who would not meet his eyes. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's take a look." Carol Whitman arrived 20 minutes later, a tired woman in her 30s with a state badge and a clipboard, and to her credit, she did her job. She walked through the Pike house slowly while Officer Knox stood by, and the 200 drivers waited in the yard, silent and patient, a wall of witnesses no foster family could explain away. What Carol Whitman found, room by room, settled the matter. She found a laundry room with a cot and no heater, where a child slept beside the water heater. She found a kitchen with 3 padlocked cabinets and a refrigerator holding little but condiments and beer. She found a chore list taped to the wall that read more like a labor schedule than anything a 9-year-old should carry. She found 2 other children, Tyler and the toddler, who flinched when Dennis raised his voice. She found state checks cashed and a pantry that didn't match the money. She found, in the bottom of a backpack, a flannel shirt wrapped around a dead radio, and when she asked Maddie what it was, the little girl said, "It's my daddy's. It's how I called for help." And Carol Whitman had to step out onto the porch for a minute before she could keep going. She had been doing this job for 11 years. She had walked through more bad houses than she could count, filled out more reports than she wanted to remember, and somewhere along the way she'd built a wall to keep the work from following her home. Most days the wall held. It did not hold that morning. She stood on the porch of the Pike house, looking out at 200 strangers who had driven through the night for a child none of them had ever met, and she thought about all the kids she'd placed who'd had no one show up for them at all, and she had to take 3 slow breaths before she trusted her voice again. "I've seen enough," she said when she came back in. Her voice was flat and professional, but her hands weren't quite steady. "Mr. and Mrs. Pike, I'm going to be filing a report this morning, and effective immediately, I'm placing an emergency hold on all 3 children in this home pending a full investigation." "You can't just take our kids," Lorraine shrieked. "We got rights. We got papers." "They were never your kids," Carol said. "They were children the state asked you to protect. And from what I'm looking at, you took the money and you didn't do the job." She turned to Officer Knox. "I'll need your help with the transport." Dennis Pike made the mistake, then, of grabbing Carol Whitman's arm. He never reached her. Hank Mercer had been watching, and Hank Mercer moved faster than a 54-year-old man had any right to, and he simply stepped between them, a wall of a man, and said, very quietly, "I wouldn't." Dennis Pike looked up at him, and at the 200 faces behind him, and he let go. Officer Knox cited the Pikes that morning and made it clear the district attorney would be looking hard at the misuse of state funds and the condition of the home. It would take months to work through the courts. But the children left the Pike house that day and never went back. The hard part came next, and Maddie was the one who said it out loud. She was sitting on the open step of Hank's truck, wrapped in Sharon Dalton's flannel coat with a cup of cocoa one of the drivers had run to get her, when the reality of it settled over her small face. "Where do I go now?" she asked. "If I can't stay here, where do I go? You all have your trucks. You have to drive away." The yard went quiet. It was the question none of them had quite let themselves think about. They had come to save her from something. Now they had to figure out what they were saving her for. You couldn't raise a child on a CB channel. You couldn't keep a little girl in a convoy. It was Carol Whitman, of all people, who provided the door. "The state's going to need to place her somewhere," she said carefully, crouching down to Maddie's level. "Ideally with someone she has a connection to, someone who can pass a home study, a background check. It's a long process, I won't lie to you. But blood isn't the only thing that counts. A documented relationship to the child's family matters. A safe home matters." She looked up at Hank Mercer. "Do you have family, Mr. Mercer?" Hank Mercer had been a widower for 6 years. His wife had passed, his own kids were grown and gone, and his house outside Amarillo had been quiet so long, he'd forgotten it could be anything else. He stood there in the cold with his cap in his hands. He thought about that quiet house, about the second bedroom he never went into, and the third one he used to store boxes, about the way he'd cut back from long hauls to regional runs after Ray died, telling everyone it was his knees, knowing it was really that the empty miles had started to feel like drowning. He had spent 2 years wondering what the rest of his life was even for, and here, in a frozen foster home yard at 7 in the morning, with Ray Caldwell's daughter shivering on his truck step, the answer had just walked up and asked him a question. "I got a house," he said slowly. 3 bedrooms. Paid for. I'm 54. I've been clean and sober 11 years. Never been arrested. And I've been running regional the last 2 years. Home every night. I quit the long hauls when Ray died. Couldn't stomach the road the same after that." His voice thickened. "Ray Caldwell was the brother I chose. If his girl needs a place, there's a place. There's always been a place. I just didn't know I was keeping it for her." Carol Whitman wrote something on her clipboard. "It's not a promise," she said. "There's a process. There are no guarantees. But I can start the paperwork today, and I can tell the court that there is a willing, stable adult with a deep, verifiable tie to this child's father." She almost smiled. "And I can tell them I've got 200 witnesses who'll swear to the kind of people her father's friends are." Maddie looked up from her cocoa. She looked at Hank, at the gray beard, the kind tired eyes, the card in his shirt pocket. She looked at the 200 drivers filling the yard, and she asked the only thing that mattered. "Would I get to hear about my daddy?" she said. "Nobody talks about him anymore. The Pikes wouldn't let me. I'm scared I'm going to forget what his voice sounded like." Hank Mercer knelt down in the gravel in front of her, and the whole Brotherhood leaned in to hear. "Baby girl," he said, "you come live with me, and I will tell you a Roadrunner story every single night for the rest of your life, and we will not get through half of them. These folks behind me?" He gestured at the crowd. Every one of 'em's got a story about your daddy, too. You're not going to forget him. We won't let you. That's a promise." And for the first time in 10 months, Maddie Caldwell smiled. The paperwork took 5 months. There were home studies and court dates, background checks and supervised visits, a guardian ad litem and a judge who asked 100 careful questions. Hank Mercer answered every one of them. He installed a smoke detector in every room because the inspector mentioned it. He bought a bed with a real headboard and let Maddie pick the quilt. She chose one with little birds on it. He learned to braid hair off a video on his phone. Badly at first, then better. Sharon Dalton came by on her days off and taught him the things a 54-year-old bachelor didn't know about raising a 9-year-old girl. The early days weren't easy, and Hank never pretended otherwise. Maddie woke screaming some nights, certain she was back in the laundry room, and Hank would sit on the floor outside her door until her breathing went soft again. She hoarded food at first, granola bars under her pillow, an apple in her sock drawer, and Hank found them and said nothing, just quietly made sure the kitchen was never locked and the fridge was always full, until one day, weeks later, the hiding stopped on its own. She tested him, too, the way hurt children do, waiting for him to get tired of her, to raise his voice, to send her back. He never did. He just kept showing up, day after day, steady as a diesel idling through the night, until she started to believe that some things in the world stayed. And he kept his promise. Every single night, he told her a Roadrunner story. The time her daddy hauled a load of circus animals and a llama spit on a state trooper. The time he sang Merle Haggard over the CB for 300 miles because a lonely driver needed the company. The little things, how he took his coffee, how he whistled when he backed into a dock, how he'd talked about his little bird at every truck stop from here to California, until the whole road knew her name before they ever met her. Maddie wrote them down in a notebook so she'd never lose them. Her father came back to life a little more with every page. The trucking community did not disappear after that morning. That was the thing about the Brotherhood. They didn't show up once and forget. A fund went around the forums and raised enough to cover a lawyer, then enough to start a college account in Maddie's name. Drivers passing through Amarillo would detour to Hank's place just to drop off a stuffed animal, a school backpack, a birthday card signed with a CB handle. The little girl who'd had nobody now had 1,000 uncles and aunts spread across every interstate in America. The Pikes lost their foster license. The investigation Carol Whitman started turned up years of misused funds, and Dennis Pike pleaded out to charges that cost him a great deal more than the $400 a month he'd skimmed. Tyler and the toddler were placed with a real family 2 counties over, a young couple who'd been trying for years to foster the right way. Maddie still got a Christmas card from Tyler every year. They'd survived the same house. That made them family of a different kind. In late March, on a bright cold morning in a county courthouse in Amarillo, a judge signed an order making Hank Mercer the legal guardian of Madison Caldwell. There were supposed to be a handful of people at the hearing: family, the lawyer, the social worker. That was all the small courtroom could hold. The parking lot told a different story. Word had gone out on Channel 19 the night before, and they had come, not 200 this time, but close. They couldn't all fit inside, so they waited in the lot, leaning against their rigs in the spring sunshine, and when Hank Mercer walked out of that courthouse holding the hand of a 9-year-old girl in a dress Sharon Dalton had bought her, 200 air horns went off at once. The sound rolled across Amarillo like thunder. People came out of buildings to see. Maddie Caldwell stood at the top of the courthouse steps in the cold, bright light, holding the hand of the man who was now, by law and by love, her family. And she looked out at all those trucks and all those drivers, and she did not cry, because she was done being sad. She lifted her free hand and waved. Hank Mercer leaned down. "You want to tell him something?" he asked. "They came all this way. Reckon you've earned the mic." He pulled a handheld CB from his jacket. Not her father's dead Cobra, but a new one, fully charged, that he'd been saving for exactly this. He'd kept Ray's old radio, though. It sat on a shelf in Maddie's room, wrapped in the flannel shirt. the most important thing she owned. Maddie took the new radio. Her hand didn't shake this time. She keyed the mic, and her voice went out across Channel 19, across the whole Brotherhood, across the parking lot full of drivers who had answered the call of a child they'd never met, because her father had been one of their own. "Breaker, breaker, 19," she said, and 200 drivers went quiet to listen. "This is Little Bird. I just wanted to say thank you. All of you. My daddy was Roadrunner, and he told me once that on this channel, somebody's always listening." Her voice wobbled, just a little, and then held. "He was right. You were all listening, and I'm not scared anymore." For a moment, the channel was silent. Then Hank Mercer raised his own mic, the card with Ray Caldwell's handle finally out of his shirt pocket and held in his open hand, and he said the words for the friend he'd buried and the daughter he'd been given. "Roadrunner," he said softly, "your girl made it home. 10-4, brother. We got her from here." And across the bright spring morning, 200 air horns answered him, a sound like a salute, like a promise kept, like a family that no road could ever break, rolling out over the Texas Panhandle and the endless ribbon of Interstate 40, where somebody, somewhere, was always listening. That night, back at the house that was now her home, Maddie set her father's old radio on the shelf by her bed, wrapped in his flannel, the dead cobra she would never throw away. She didn't need it to call for help anymore, but she kept it where she could see it, because it had done its one job when it mattered most. It had carried a scared little girl's voice out into the dark, and the dark had answered. She climbed under the quilt with the little birds on it. Down the hall, she could hear Hank moving around the kitchen, putting on the coffee for the morning, humming something off-key. Outside, far away, the highway breathed its endless breath, all those engines rolling east and west through the night. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't make her sad. It just sounded like the whole world driving safe. She closed her eyes, and somewhere between the hum of the highway and the smell of fresh coffee, Madison Caldwell finally, truly, fell asleep, home.